Welcome to our deep dive, everybody. This time, we're going to be tackling complex problem solving.
Ooh, sounds intense.
Yeah, but also super fascinating. We've got a whole bunch of sources for this one. Academic excerpts, research papers, even a government-funded study.
Wow, so we're going all in.
Definitely. I wanted to make sure we get a good, well-rounded view.
Makes sense.
So we're going to try and answer some big questions today. First off, what are the absolute key things you need to know about complex problem solving based on all this stuff we've read?
Yeah, what's the need to know info?
Exactly. Then we're going to look at how researchers are studying it, because there are a bunch of different ways, and honestly, that's interesting in itself.
Oh, I can see how that would be. Like, why are they looking at it from all these different angles?
Right. And finally, the fun part, any surprising findings, anything in this research that might just change how you think about, solving problems in your everyday life.
Love that. Okay, so first things first, right? What exactly is complex problem solving? Because it's got to be more than just, like, solving a tough Sudoku,
Oh, yeah, way more to it. So one of our sources, this excerpt by French and Funke, they define it as a process that involves multiple steps to overcome obstacles between where you are now and where you want to be.
Okay, so there's a starting point, a goal, and some roadblocks in between.
Exactly. But, and here's the tricky part, those obstacles, your starting point, even the goal itself, they can all be kind of shifting and unpredictable.
Ah, so it's not a clear path, more like navigating a jungle.
Yeah. And it's not always obvious what those obstacles even are. The source uses the word opaque, which I thought was a good way to describe it.
Opaque, like you can't see through it. Makes sense. So it's not like a simple math problem where everything's laid out neat and tidy.
Definitely not. It's more like, what's a good example? Imagine trying to manage a budget.
Oh yeah, that's never simple.
Right. Your income changes,
Yeah.
unexpected expenses pop up, interest rates go crazy, it's constantly shifting. Or like planning a trip.
Yeah, you've got delays, cancellations, weather, so many things you can't control.
Exactly. Even leading a team at work, that can be a complex problem to solve. People's personalities, project goals, everything's in flux.
Okay, so anything that feels like you're juggling chainsaws while riding a unicycle, that's complex problem solving.
Haha, yeah, that's a pretty good analogy. Now, there's this really famous study in the field. It's called the Lohausen experiment, done by a researcher named Derner.
Lohausen. Sounds like a made-up place.
It was. He actually created a whole simulated town for this experiment.
Whoa, a whole virtual town. That's dedication.
Right, and he had students act as the mayor of this town. But what's really interesting is that he wasn't just focused on, if they could solve problems, but how they went about it.
So, like, their problem-solving style.
Exactly. And what they found was pretty surprising. The students' IQ, their intelligence, wasn't the best predictor of whether they'd be a successful mayor or not.
Hold on. You're saying being super smart didn't automatically make you a great problem solver?
Nope. It turned out that other things mattered more, like how well they could stay calm under pressure and how easily they could switch between different ways of thinking.
Ooh, so, like, not panicking when things go wrong and being able to see both the big picture and the little details.
Exactly. And this is a pretty big takeaway, right? It suggests that maybe your problem-solving style is just as important as your raw intelligence.
That's pretty cool. Like, maybe we're all better problem solvers than we think, especially if we've ever felt like those IQ tests didn't really capture what we can do.
Right. And that just scratches the surface. There's actually so much research out there on complex problem solving, and they're looking at it from all these different angles. One of the papers we read actually outlines 5 different approaches.
5. Wow. Okay, so it's not just one thing. It's a whole field of study.
Exactly. And each approach has its own focus. Like, for example, there's one that looks at individual differences. Kind of like that Lohausen study we were just talking about. What are the personal traits and thinking styles that make someone a good, complex problem solver?
So, like, are some people naturally more adaptable, more strategic?
Exactly. But that's just one of the 5. There's so much more to unpack and some really interesting insights that I think could change how you approach problems in your own life. But before we dive into that, have you ever heard of the term cognitive penetrability?
Cognitive what now? That's a new
It's
one.
a bit of a mouthful, I know. But it's basically the idea that even basic mental processes, like how we understand what we read, can be influenced by our background knowledge and expectations.
Wait, so what I already know can actually change how I interpret new information? That's kind of trippy.
It is, right. Imagine two people watching the same news report, but they come away with totally different interpretations because of their pre-existing beliefs.
Oh, I see what you mean. That's cognitive penetrability in action.
Yeah. Exactly. Now think about how much more this applies to complex problems, where there's even more unknowns and potential biases at play.
So if you're not careful, your own preconceived notions could be skewing how you see the whole problem.
Precisely. And that's one of the biggest things I took away from all this research. It's a good reminder to be aware of our own assumptions, and actively seek out different perspectives when we're tackling tough problems.
Great point. So being open-minded is key. What other surprises did you find in the research?
Oh, there's one more I wanted to mention before we take a break. It's something Derner observed in his Lohausen study, and he called it the emergency reaction.
The emergency reaction. Okay, now I'm really curious.
So basically, it's what happens when we're under pressure. When things get stressful, we tend to oversimplify things, rush into action, and overgeneralize.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. It's like when I have a deadline looming, I just grab the first solution that comes to mind without really thinking it through.
That's a perfect example. It's almost like our brains go into survival mode, and we lose some of our higher-level thinking skills.
So how do we avoid that trap? Is there a way to stay cool and collected when the pressure's on?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And luckily, researchers have actually found some more deliberate approaches that can be really helpful even when things are crazy stressful.
Okay, I need to hear these strategies. Spill the beans.
All right, so one that stood out to me was the very one thing at a time strategy, or for short, VOTAT.
VOTAT. I like it. Sounds very methodical.
It is. Instead of changing a bunch of things all at once and hoping for the best, you isolate each variable and see what effect it has on the problem.
Oh, so it's about being systematic, even when you're feeling pressured to just do something.
Exactly. It might seem a bit slow at first, but it actually lets you gain a much deeper understanding of how the system works.
Makes sense. So instead of just randomly tweaking things, you're actually figuring out the cause and effect.
Right. And that kind of self-regulation, resisting that urge to just jump in, that's actually a key ingredient in effective, complex problem solving, according to the research.
So slowing down and being systematic is the key, even when it feels like everything's on fire around you.
It is. It's a valuable skill to develop, for sure. Now, before we go to break, I got to mention one more crucial distinction that our sources highlight the difference between knowledge and application.
Okay, so like knowing something versus actually being able to do it?
Yeah. Think about it in terms of, like, the studies we've been discussing. One of them, called MicroDYN, they found that even when people could clearly identify the rules of a complex system, they didn't always know how to actually use those rules effectively in real time.
So it's like knowing all the grammar rules of a language but still struggling to speak it fluently?
Perfect example. You could know everything there is to know about a subject, but if you can't put that knowledge into action when it matters, it's not going to help you solve a real problem.
It's like knowing all the traffic laws but still being a terrible driver.
Haha, exactly. So with complex problem solving, it's not just about what you know, but how you can use that knowledge in a dynamic, unpredictable environment.
So knowledge is important, but it's just the starting point. You got to be able to apply it, adapt it, make it work for you.
Exactly. And this brings us to one of the biggest and I think most exciting surprises that emerge from all this research, a finding that really challenges how we traditionally think about intelligence.
Ooh, okay. Now you've got my attention. What's this big reveal?
Well, a lot of the research is pointing to the idea that our traditional intelligence tests, like the famous Ravens matrices, they might not be capturing the full picture when it comes to complex problem solving.
Hold on. Are you saying those tests we've all taken, they're not telling us the whole story?
That's what the research suggests. If you think about it, those tests are very static, right? They give you a fixed problem and a limited set of solutions. But real-world problems are rarely like that.
It's true. Real life is messy. There are always curveballs and new information popping up.
Exactly. And that's where those traditional tests fall short. Complex problem solving requires a much more dynamic approach. You need to be able to gather new information as you go, adjust your strategies, deal with unexpected obstacles. It's a whole different ballgame.
So you're saying those tests might be missing out on a whole set of crucial skills that are actually essential for navigating the real world.
That's the idea. And get this, studies have shown that performance on complex problem-solving tasks can actually predict real-world outcomes, like academic success, even better than traditional IQ scores.
So someone who might score average on an IQ test could actually be a far more effective problem solver in real life.
Exactly. And this raises such a huge question for all of us. Is there more to our potential than those static tests suggest?
Right. Like, are we undervaluing certain skills that are absolutely crucial in today's world?
It's a really thought-provoking idea. It's almost like we've been looking at intelligence all wrong for years.
It's a real paradigm shift, for
Mhm.
sure. And the implications are huge.
Absolutely. This makes me want to rethink how we approach everything from education to hiring to, well, just about every aspect of life. But we are going to take a quick break here to let all this sink in.
Yeah, I need a minute to process all this.
Me too. But don't go anywhere, because when we come back, we're going to explore these implications even further. We'll be back in a moment.
Looking forward to it.
Welcome back. So before the break, we were really getting into this idea that there's more to our potential than those traditional intelligence tests might let on.
Right, that whole beyond IQ thing.
Yeah, it really got me thinking, like if those tests aren't telling the whole story, what are those hidden strengths and how do we even tap into them?
It's a great question. And luckily, there's a ton of research out there trying to figure that out.
Mhm.
To really understand it, I think it helps to go back to Derner's Lohausen study.
The simulated town.
Exactly.
Yep.
Remember how he found that the most successful mayors weren't always the ones with the highest IQs?
Yeah, it was more about how they handled the pressure, right? And how flexible they were in their thinking.
Exactly. They could stay calm when things went wrong and switch between the big picture and the little details effortlessly. And that, my friend, is a key characteristic of what researchers call adaptive expertise.
Adaptive expertise. Okay, I like the sound of that. But is that something you're just born with? Or can you actually learn to be more adaptable?
Great question. And the good news is you can absolutely develop adaptive expertise. It's not just about innate talent. It's about cultivating a specific set of skills.
Okay, so what are the keys to unlocking the superpower? Where do we even begin?
Well, there's several key components. First, and this is a big one, there's metacognition.
Metacognition. Yeah, I've heard that term before. It's basically thinking about your own thinking, right?
That's it. Good problem solvers are constantly monitoring their own understanding. They're asking themselves things like, does this make sense? What assumptions am I making? Do I need more information?
So it's like having your own internal fact checker and strategy consultant, always keeping you on track.
Exactly. And that leads to the next component,
Mhm.
regulation. Can you adjust your approach when things aren't working or when the situation changes?
Regulation. That's a tough one for me, I think. I tend to get stuck in one way of thinking and have trouble switching gears.
It's a common challenge, and you're not alone. But the good news is, like any skill, regulation can be practiced and improved. It's all about building that mental agility. Training your brain to shift between different perspectives and strategies, even mindsets.
So instead of getting frustrated when my initial plan falls apart, I should see it as a chance to flex those mental muscles and come up with a new approach.
Exactly. Now, another crucial element of adaptive expertise is knowledge acquisition. This isn't just about memorizing a bunch of facts. It's about knowing how to find relevant information, evaluate its credibility, and integrate it into your existing understanding.
So it's not just what you know, but how you learn. You're constantly expanding your knowledge base and refining how you see the world.
That's a great way to put it. And then finally, there's strategic thinking. This is about being able to identify different options, anticipate potential consequences, and make decisions that align with your goals, even when there's no clear right answer.
Strategic thinking. Yeah, that seems pretty crucial when you're dealing with, well, pretty much anything in life. There's rarely a clear instruction manual, so you have to weigh the pros and cons, assess the risks, and make the best decision you can.
Exactly. And all of these components, metacognition, regulation, knowledge acquisition, strategic thinking, they all work together. You can't really be a strategic thinker if you're not also good at those other things.
It's like they all build on each other to create this, ultimate problem-solving toolkit.
That's a great way to think about it. But now the question is, how do we actually develop these skills? Are there any practical tips or exercises we can use?
That's what I was just thinking. Give us the actionable steps.
Okay, so one technique that comes up again and again in the research is called reflective practice.
Reflective practice. Okay, break that down for me.
Basically, it's about taking the time after a problem-solving experience to analyze what went well, what could have been better, and what you learned. You're turning your experiences into learning opportunities.
So instead of just moving on to the next thing, you're actually taking a pause to reflect on what just happened, really dissecting the experience and trying to learn from it.
Exactly. Think back to the recent project you worked on. Did it go as planned? What were the key decision points? Did you gather all the information you needed before making those decisions? Did you communicate effectively with your team? What would you do differently next time? These are all valuable questions to ask yourself.
I can see how it'd be really helpful. It's so easy to just brush off a failure and move on, but if you take the time to really think it through, you can gain so much insight.
Absolutely. And another powerful tool is deliberate practice. This is about breaking down those complex skills into smaller components and focusing on improving each one individually.
So instead of trying to get better at problem solving in general, I should focus on, say, improving my metacognition or my strategic thinking.
Exactly. And the key here is to make it deliberate. Don't just passively go through the motions. Set specific goals, get feedback on your progress, and actively work on your weaknesses. You want to push yourself beyond your comfort zone and really hone those skills.
It's like, instead of just reading a news article and hoping I absorb something, I should be actively challenging myself to think critically about the information, identify biases, question assumptions, connect it to what I already know.
That's a perfect example. You can even create little CPS challenges for yourself in your daily life. Choose a complex task, like planning a trip or organizing an event, and consciously apply those skills we've been talking about.
I love that idea, turning everyday life into a training ground for complex problem-solving skills. This is already changing how I think about approaching challenges. It's not about avoiding problems altogether. It's about building the skills to face them head on.
That's fantastic to hear. And remember, it's an ongoing journey. Adaptive expertise isn't a destination. It's a way of approaching the world. You're constantly learning, adapting, and improving.
It's about embracing the messiness and using those challenges as opportunities to grow.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe by developing these skills, we can unlock even greater potential than those traditional intelligence tests ever imagined.
Okay, I'm officially on board with this whole adaptive expertise thing, but I'm also curious about the bigger picture. If complex problem solving is truly beyond IQ, what does that mean for things like education, the workplace, even politics? How should we be approaching these things differently?
Yeah, those are the million-dollar questions.
Yeah.
And it's exactly what we're going to explore after the break, so don't go anywhere.
All right, so we're back and ready to tackle those million-dollar questions you mentioned. If complex problem solving is really this beyond IQ thing, what does that mean for the world around us? How should we be approaching, like, education, work, even politics?
Huge questions. And I think the implications are, well, pretty massive. So let's start with education, right? If we're saying these CPS skills are crucial for navigating today's world, then it seems like our education systems need maybe a bit of an overhaul.
Yeah, less about memorizing facts and more about, I don't know, actually using those facts to solve problems.
Exactly. Less rote memorization and standardized testing. More about encouraging experimentation, questioning assumptions, learning from mistakes, all those things we were just talking about.
So classrooms that are more about, like, active learning and collaboration, less about just, cramming for the next test.
That's the idea. Imagine a classroom where kids are encouraged to try things out, even fail sometimes, and then learn from those experiences.
Yeah.
Where they're taught how to work together, communicate effectively, think critically. Those are the skills that will really prepare them for the future, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. But okay, realistically, how do we actually shift such a huge system? Because education, that's like deeply ingrained, right?
Oh, yeah. It would be a massive undertaking, no doubt.
Yeah.
But I think if we can pull it off, the potential payoff is enormous.
Yeah.
We'd be equipping future generations with the tools they actually need to tackle those big, complex challenges we're facing, like climate change, social inequality, all of that.
It's like we're still teaching people how to operate in the world of, like, 10 years ago, when what they really need are the skills for the world of tomorrow.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Mhm.
Now, let's think about the workplace for a minute. How do you think this whole beyond IQ perspective changes how companies approach hiring, training, even just evaluating their employees?
Well, it seems like just looking at someone's resume or their GPA, that wouldn't be enough anymore, would it? You'd need a way to assess their, like, actual problem-solving skills, how they think, how they adapt, how they work with others.
Exactly. You'd want to see how they approach real-world problems, right?
Yeah.
Maybe through simulations or group projects, or even just by asking them about how they've handled challenges in the past. It'd be much more about seeing them in action, not just reading about their qualifications on paper.
It'd be a much more dynamic hiring process for sure. And then once they're hired, I imagine training would look pretty different too. Like, less about just learning the company's procedures and more about developing those core CPS skills.
Right. Programs focused on metacognition, regulation, strategic thinking, all of that. You'd be investing in your employees' ability to, like, think critically and adapt to change, which would benefit everyone in the long run.
Companies that do that, they'd have a huge advantage, wouldn't they? They'd attract top talent, people who are excited about constantly learning and growing.
For sure. And it would create a much more innovative, resilient workforce, right? People who aren't afraid to take risks and try new things.
It's almost like the company itself would become this like complex adaptive system,
Yeah.
constantly evolving and responding to the changing demands of the market.
Ooh, that's a really cool way to think about it.
Mhm.
Which makes you wonder, like, why are more companies already doing this? If these skills are so valuable, what's holding them back?
Maybe it's just like the inertia of tradition. We've been doing things a certain way for so long that it's hard to break out of those old patterns, even when they're clearly not working anymore.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. And maybe there's also a bit of fear, right? These CPS skills, they're harder to, like, define and measure than things like IQ or GPA. It's a new frontier, in a way.
But the research is catching up, right? We're developing better tools and frameworks all the time. I have a feeling it's just a matter of time before this beyond IQ approach becomes the new normal.
I think so, too. And as that happens, I'm really excited to see how it plays out in, well, pretty much every area of life, not just education and work. But speaking of areas where these skills are desperately needed, what about politics?
Ooh, yeah, the big one. Could this whole beyond IQ thing actually help us choose better leaders and make better policies?
It's a fascinating question. Remember that one source that talked about the sense of possibility being crucial for political decision-making, yet barely studied?
Yeah, that really stuck with me. Like, what if we could measure and train that ability? What if we could identify leaders who are not only intelligent, but also adaptable, strategic, and able to see the bigger picture?
That's a pretty tantalizing thought, isn't it?
Hmm.
Could we avoid some of those, well, historical blunders that were clearly the result of poor decision-making? Could we find leaders who are more forward-thinking, who can anticipate challenges and adapt to unexpected situations? I mean, it's definitely something worth exploring, right?
Absolutely. It makes you realize there's this whole realm of human potential that we're just beginning to tap into. And maybe, just maybe, by embracing these principles of complex problem solving, we can create a better future, for ourselves, for the next generation, for everyone.
That's a beautiful thought, and it's been such a privilege to explore this with you today. I've learned so much.
Me too. This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. We've unpacked the science, looked at real-world applications, even pondered some pretty big questions about, the nature of intelligence and problem-solving itself. It's been a wild ride.
And hopefully our listeners are walking away with a whole new perspective on what it means to be a good problem solver.
I hope so too. So to everyone listening, remember, embrace metacognition. Think about how you think. Practice regulation. Learn to adapt when things don't go as planned. Be a knowledge-seeking ninja. Always be curious and seek out new information. And don't be afraid to think strategically. The world needs your unique problem-solving abilities. Until next time, happy diving, everyone.